container for today is to support one another to prepare for our curiosity conversations. Think of this as us getting clear, like, why are we doing this? The approach, that this gratitude-based approach, this curiosity conversation approach that we want to bring into that focus and process. Part of why I asked the flow and the friction, why we check in on flow and friction. Have you ever noticed when someone's like, how are you doing? What's going on? It can be like, it's all this, or, it's, you tell a good story or a bad story, or this is, I feel happy, I feel sad. In reality, there's both. And it's not all good, it's not all bad, it is. And so that's why when we're checking in, we're looking at both of it and we celebrate that. And so I want to shift here into helping us prepare for our curiosity conversations. So I'm curious around the why, even before we get into like what we're doing. And I'm curious what if we say flow and friction of like what's clear or not clear in terms of the why right now for you.
So I would just say that what's clear is probably we're doing this to just become more curious about like the things in our community related to their passion and sustainability and things like that. And then the only thing that I would probably say I'm unclear of is like what are we asking them exactly?
Like what's flowing is like, I understand the purpose. I kind of understand what we're supposed to ask. I guess I just don't entirely get how to like initiate it or where it should go, I guess.
Can you share more about the purpose that's clear for you, Sophia? Why are we doing this?
Well, I guess just to kind of hear other people's perspectives on it, gain more like insight into that. And in my club, I have members from like all over the world. So it's cool to hear like how climate change impacts each of them uniquely as compared to me. So I like having these sorts of conversations with people. But yeah, I guess there isn't a ton of confusion.
I'll share the why from my perspective on this. How do we go about bringing change into our campus? What we're practicing this week, the why, is a shift from maybe the old way of training to a new way of training. And the old way of training is, I think I see things from a certain perspective, or I've heard about solar panels, or I've heard about composting, I think something is better. And now I go to push. I'm now going to sell or tell. That's maybe the old way that we've been trained. That's how I was trained. What we're practicing here is a new way of discovering and building a relationship. Rather than telling and pushing, we're practicing getting curious and discovering and building a connection. And so why we're doing this is we're taking the emotional charge out of you moving forward, call it your project right now, and we're giving us a space to practice this skill, seeing what bubbles up and getting really curious with what bubbles up in a setting where we're not trying to convince or push or tell anything. So it's not, call it your project, and how the conversation goes dictates whether your project is a success. It is use Onora as the excuse to have a conversation that's not about pushing or telling. It's around practicing the skill of getting curious and discovering what information wants to flow from that other person's perspective. There's a wealth of information that they will only share if they feel valued and seen and heard and appreciated. And if the conditions for them to feel safe aren't there, they're not going to share where they're actually coming from. And so why we're doing this is to practice how do we build that trusting relationship and help the information that's there flow.
I would like to ask you to elaborate on how you see that turn out into action. Most of us are here because we would like to see a better world, right? Most of us are here because we would like to see people adopting a better practice. Can you tie the link between what it is that we are doing and that outcome? How do we actually see? Because it seems counterintuitive, right? That we are not here to talk about our agenda or see things, but could you give some examples of how we could actually get results so much faster and better? And
so the people that we're connecting with, if we want to get to action, and whatever that action is, whether it's having our family start recycling, whether it's getting composting implemented at our school, if we want to get to that action, it's not just us doing the whole thing. There's people that are going to be part of this as well. People who get impacted, people who are part of the approval process, people who have a sense of what life is actually like being part of the family union, unit and the financials of the family and the flow of the family or the flow of the school, the flow of the cafeteria. And so these conversations, by understanding what life's actually like for them, by understanding what their worries, hopes, fears are, we can discover what is actually needed, because what's actually needed might not be recycling to start. What's actually needed might not be composting to start. Something might need to be addressed or alleviated so that the things that might ultimately be things that we want to implement. If we're drowning from stress, we're drowning from our current workflows, we're drowning from the way that one another treat one another, we might not be able to actually get to action on the things we want to get to. And so these conversations right now are learning what's actually needed so that we can now go implement what's going to actually be helpful, not just sounds good.
And there are quite a few settings here. One is, let's say, with friends and family, colleagues that are like-minded. And that's one kind of, let's say, dynamics. And let's say I was going out and connecting with a GMO farmer. That will be a rather different dynamics, because I'm trying to connect with somebody who has a very different point of view than me. Okay, so should I come from it with this, okay, I want him to change or do something different? That's causing conflict. That's causing, me getting defensive. If I could come from this idea that I really want to learn why he thinks that's such a good idea to use GMO and chemicals and whatever, right? Now, that I manage during my conversation, allowing that guy to feel absolutely seen, heard, valued, appreciated even, there's a chance that other person will get curious about where I'm coming from. But we'll have to wait until they ask. That's the thing. You can't tell anybody anything until they want to know. So could you make that other person feel seen, heard, valued, appreciated? There's a chance that they might get curious about who you are and what you're up to. And then you have an opportunity to share when they really want to listen. But it takes holding back until that happens.
So I threw 4 words in the chat here: discover, imagine, improve, and implement. So the example of Brophy, them moving forward project, they didn't start with implementing, and didn't start with, all right, here are ideas, let's go. And it also didn't start with, where would we like it to be? It actually starts with discover. And so call it the first project, the first go around, the first cycle is discovering what's there. We ultimately would love to get to both parts discovering, right? Where they're discovering where we're coming from, we're discovering where they're coming from. But it starts with them feeling seen and heard and valued and appreciated, and that they feel like we're actually hearing them. This week is about practicing helping someone feel very heard and seen in this topic that we're bringing up, getting to hear where they're coming from. It's not about them now discovering where we're coming from and then us getting into a preachy soliloquy, which I know in the notes was one of our worries that was brought up, of like, that's the association that some people have, is if when we bring up the topic, they're going to just get talked at. This is for us and for them to experience something perhaps very different. Is we have a topic, and I'm not here to talk at you. I'm here to better understand, discover your world without judgment. This is gratitude-based learning. It's the gratitude for what is coming up in that conversation. Whether it's creating flow in us, whether it's creating friction in us, how can we practice whatever that we're hearing, not judging it and getting curious about it? And that's the approach that, depending on how charged we feel, depending on the relationships, can be extra challenging to just be grateful for what's coming up as a discovery, rather than this is good, this is bad, and now I need to go react from that charged place. This is what's bubbling up. Now let's get curious. It's a symptom. It's the tip of the iceberg. Now we're getting curious around what's beneath the water. If what we hear above the waterline is getting us triggered, this is now the practice where we get to not push. It's where we get to now get curious. And so that's what we're training this week, is we're hearing what people are putting out there. We're hearing what people will share. And that's above the waterline. And we now get to get curious. We get to appreciate, be grateful for what they're choosing to share, the symptom that's coming up above the waterline. And we get to practice getting curious and exploring below the waterline, even if what they're sharing is elevating some friction in us. What are you guys hearing from this? What's flowing, or what's clearer, or what's perhaps less clear for you now that you're hearing this?
Things that I definitely want to improve upon in myself, like coming from a place of non-judgment, especially when people say things that you don't really want to hear. We did like an awareness campaign last year with my club for the Willow Project, the drilling campaign in Alaska. Petition signing event at my school for the Stop the Willow Project petition that was like getting sent to the White House and stuff. We made it really fun. We like made a bunch of like baked goods and stuff to get people to come and enjoy some baked goods. We'll teach you about the Willow Project, and then feel free to sign. If not, that's okay. We just want to like educate you guys about it. But then I had some kids come up that just were not super respectful. Like I had one guy come and he is like, I think this is all stupid. Like I drive race cars. I need oil. Like if anything, I think this is amazing. They should go forward with the Willow Project. I was like, well, that's kind of frustrating for me. But also I understand like he drives race cars. But I don't know. It's hard to have understanding for things that are frustrating for you.
Like it just really makes sense how people don't want to be told what to do. You have different perspectives, and making sure that they feel valued and seen and heard is most important.
I kind of figured that out through like trial and error. If you just like tell people to do stuff, they're more likely to not do the thing that you want them to do.
And it's almost like just putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. Someone's telling us do this, our walls will probably go up. But now as we're practicing this, if someone's going tell us, we're practicing to add another tool to our tool belt. Rather than us pushing that away, we'll be able to get curious. If someone's coming in with whatever energy, we can help that person feel seen and heard and valued, appreciated, rather than I'm now going to push that person away. I'm now going to isolate them.
I was just curious if you had any like specific examples of how you handled like friction from other people towards Onora.
The way that we handle it is exactly what we're practicing this week. For example, I'll share a very specific example. There's someone that wants to bring gratitude-based learning into a school, and they're a think of it as like a corporate consultant. And so they want to cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure they get it, and they want to see that happen. And they haven't gone through our programs, but the idea of this is really exciting. And so when we're on a call, let's just say they come in real hot with questions. Rather than me getting triggered and going into a fight or flight mode, the way I practice gratitude-based learning is just taking their questions as grateful that these are bubbling up, and then getting curious. And we get to then have a curiosity conversation around what's actually behind the questions and what they're actually looking for. Because if I just responded to the very first thing that they said, we're actually not getting to the root of what they're trying to learn. We're getting in a fight or flight, go conversation around the tip of the iceberg, not actually getting below the waterline. And so that's just a way that I handle that. Or even if I'm on like a panel and someone asks a question that's like a very charged question, by practicing this, it helps to actually get behind what are they actually trying to ask. And then we can actually have a real conversation around the real topic. So in terms of bringing this gratitude-based approach into that focus, into that process, you guys brought up a lot of questions in terms of like, how do we introduce this? What are the questions that we ask?
And also maybe like how one would initiate the conversation.
If I could just maybe set the overall picture, really important that you get across what is the container for that meeting, that they are clear on the purpose for you connecting with them. I'll give you an example of how this can go totally wrong. In the adults program, we had a lady, she wanted to connect with her favorite sushi restaurant. She'd been ordering online during all of COVID, and now she wanted to go for the first time in person and say thank you to the chef. And she was really excited about it and said thank you all the time about how do you keep your fish so fresh and where you source from and all of that. And that little Japanese lady just did like that, not going there. And she saw there was some kind of food inspector, right? Because the container had not been set. Why are we talking? Make sure that in the beginning of the conversation, get that clear.
So the why is very important. That's the container. The why, or call it the excuse, can use this fellowship as an excuse of we're doing a project as part of this program, as part of this fellowship. That's setting the container and learning about someone's perspective on the state of the world these days, learning about their perspective on things today. But why them? How do we help someone feel seen and heard and valued, appreciated? Because you chose them for a reason. How do we now open them up? Whether we're sending this email, whether this is we're at the dinner table and we're like, hey, here's a time where I can now open up the conversation. I'd really like to connect with you because I'll use your dad's as an example. I really appreciate what you've instilled in me in terms of a love for the environment just by the way you help lead our family. As a dad hearing that, I'd imagine opening up a little bit and being warmer to a conversation. Think of it as 3 parts: opening the conversation, setting the stage. What Henrik used that term, a container, creating a boundary to what we're talking about in the conversation, letting them know why we're there and why you've chosen to connect with them. And so sharing that thank you can help them feel more seen and heard and valued and appreciated. Part 1 is, where are they coming from today? We're not telling them anything. It's just, we're connecting with them. We have some sample questions. If environmental issues, something that keeps them up at night, it's always been the case, what's changed? So to get an understanding of kind of their journey and how are they feeling about the state of the planet, environmental stuff today.
What do you do if in the first part their kind of like response to all the questions is no? Like, it's like, do you worry about the environment? No. Like, have you done anything for the planet? No, not really. Like,
I want you to take a look at the way the questions are phrased here. So this is one of the things we're practicing in curiosity conversations, is how to open up for the possibility for things to flow. And so if you noticed, I'm not asking any yes or no questions. Nothing I'm asking is a yes or no. The beginning here is, to what extent are they keeping you up at night? So it's not even, do they keep you up at night? These are questions for inspiration. These are not exact questions that you need to ask.
like, for example, say I was going to have a conversation with the race car driver kid. It's like, is something, our environmental issue, something that keeps you up at night? Say he was just like, no, it's not. Like, to what extent do you worry about it? I don't really worry about it at all. Like, that's what I mean, if you're kind of like hitting dead ends there.
We're meeting the person where they're at so that we can connect and we can open up from there.
A really good thing is to find something about that race driver that you can appreciate. What could that be? It doesn't really matter what, but it needs to be authentic. So if you're trying to mock it or fake it or whatever, that can be felt, and that's not going to create connection. You need to find something, and then let them talk about whatever it is that they're passionate about. That more easily gets them into that feeling of feeling seen and heard. Once you have a sense that you're there, okay, now you can go more into other areas that you're curious about, but be curious about what's their take on whatever it is.
Remember the ripple effect reflection? Because the cafeteria exists, the positive impact, and then because of that positive impact, what then happens? And then because that thing happens, what then happens? That's a tool to help us not just think gratitude, but like feel it in our body. There's other things we can do too, but that's one of the things that could help us. If we want the outcome to be an authentic gratitude, that's a tool that we'd recommend using before these conversations when we're preparing for our approach, to literally do that so that when we're in the moment, we can fall back on that. And then that's a skill that we then can practice so that I can now be in a conversation and I don't have to write things down. I can start to see the positive ripples. Like if someone's wearing a shirt with a logo on it, there's a reason why they chose that shirt that day. And so if I'm saying, whoa, that shirt's really cool. I've never seen something like that. Like, where do you get it? I'm seeing the tip of the iceberg, and now I'm getting curious around what's below the waterline. And who knows what comes from that. And so then it can flow. One of the topics we're exploring is how to apply this gratitude-based learning approach to environmental topics. And I'm curious for you, Mr. Race Car Driver, like, I know environmental stuff's all in the news and all this stuff, but like, to what extent is it something that keeps you up at night? Like, is this something that you think about much, or what's it like for you when this topic comes up? And so how are you feeling about kind of the state of the planet, the state of the world today? Like, what's in your space about that? How are you feeling about this? Because what you see as the state of the planet might not be the way that they're seeing the state of the planet.
And there's probably things we can find common ground on. Like, I know, like, something that bothers a lot of people is like, there's a lot of trash left around the snack bar, and like, it bothers a lot of kids just because it makes the snack bar look kind of nasty. But like, from my perspective, it's like an environmental perspective. Like, I don't like that there's single-use plastic left everywhere and then discarded at nighttime, But for everyone else, they don't like sitting in place with a lot of trash around them.
How long can we withhold sharing our stuff? Like, in just getting curious about their world, rather than, when they share something, rather than us going in to tell, ask a follow-up. You can read back, like, here's what I'm hearing, but ask a follow-up to better understand. And which works in some cases, but in other cases, in other cultures, when you're not sharing your perspective, it can feel weird. So it's up to you to figure out what is that balance of reading back what someone's hearing to make sure that you actually are understanding correctly, and getting curious about their perspective, and not just having it be a one-sided conversation because they want to learn about you too.
I think the best measure is before you enter into a conversation, just ask yourself, are you really curious about what's going on for that other person? Whether it's a race car driver or a restaurant worker, if you cannot say yes to yourself that I really just want to learn about what they know, their experience, this is going to be awkward, right? Because you're going to there and pretend to be curious. That's a tough one, right? So I would recommend to go back and work on the ripple effects until you can really feel that gratitude or curiosity. Unless that's authentic, yeah, good luck. And so if it is authentic, okay, it's going to flow. Don't worry. That you cannot go wrong if you just and allow that conversation to go in whatever direction. What keeps them up at night? Oh, that's one way of asking it. But what gets them out of bed in the morning? I think that's a better question, because that's tapping into what's their passion. If you can tap into that one, they will talk forever. You really know how to tap into that one. And then if you get to environment, yeah, good. If not, maybe you'll take a second conversation before you get there.
There's a really awesome difference with what Henrik just said. If we talk about leading with love, that question that Henrik asked, what the difference between what keeps you up at night versus what gets you out of bed in the morning. One is asking you to look for the things that give you anxiety and worry. And the other is asking to look for the things that give you excitement and breathe life into you. And so I, for one, would love to change what's in number 2. But that's just an example of, rather than being fixed to, you need to ask these questions, I think it's better to be mindful of why are we doing this? Because if at the end of the day, we're leading with love rather than fear, whatever questions we come up with will be very different. Why do you do what you do? Because then maybe there's an exchange then for you to share, here's what gets me out of bed. I feel very passionate about this. Now people are leading with what's breathing life into us rather than here's just what I'm worried about. There's enough things to be worried about. The conversation, maybe it doesn't end up getting to environmental stuff. It's possible that does not happen. Part of what we're practicing here is how we're this process of relationship building for a project at a school, for example. Sometimes we will have a connection with that person already, and sometimes we won't have a connection with that person yet. And so what we're doing is establishing a connection. And so if there's no connection that's established, information that we want to get to can't flow. And so if we already have that connection with friends or family on this topic, or in the case of the cafeteria, if we have not had any interaction and we have 20 minutes, establishing a connection is the first step before we can getting into a whole long conversation around environmental stuff. But in that first conversation, it's very possible you might not get them to show them that article, or you might not get to show them or ask them for the feedback on the project you're working on for school in the very first conversation. If there's no connection. But so what we're practicing this week is, depending on the current state of those relationships, what does it feel like to connect and open up? And maybe it flows into the topic you want to talk about really quickly. Who knows?